There to fix.
Standing room only.
Oh, is that where the piano is? No.
No, it's the one on the second floor.
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. So I'm sorry, not the same room.
Well, can we move, can we move to the one that he did? You know,
We could
No.
move.
we can do that.
Stand on the very spot that Jacques Derrida.
That's- Absolutely, absolutely.
You know, he deserves it. you
That's
know.
right.
Yes, absolutely.
So Gregory Ulmer, oh, and for the plasma students, because there are some students here, actually, there are only 3 students, everybody else here is just here out of fascination. So we have 2 weeks left. Next week is some screenings, something special, little treat, and then the last week we have one more speaker. And the syllabus, which is online, remember to hit your reload, is all up to date with the readings for the entire semester, so you can make sure you've got your class journal all set and you have the readings for the next 2 weeks. And so today is one of the highlights of the semester. We do have many highlights, but this is certainly a delightful highlight. And Gregory Ulmer is professor in the Department of English at the University of Florida, which I actually didn't really believe Florida had universities until I was invited there. It's a big university, and they have a very nice logo too. I like gators. And professor of electronic languages and cybermedia at the European Graduate School in Saas-Fee, Switzerland. This information is up on the webpage. He's the author of a number of books, and he's had a tremendous career. He's the author of Internet Invention from Literacy to Electricity, which he'll be addressing today, and Theoretics, the Logic of Invention, Teletheory, Grammatology in the Age of Video, and Applied Grammatology, Post-E to Pedagogy from Jacques Derrida to Joseph Boyd. And so the students who don't know who Jacques Derrida and Joseph Boyd are, need to find out. Your degree may be held up. Just kidding. but you won't be disappointed, I tell you. It's even better than ours. And so he has a number of online writing projects, and his most recent book, Electronic Monumentality, Consulting Internet Memory, is forthcoming from the University of Minnesota Press. He just had issued a book called Avatar Emergency, which is just a really tremendous book, and actually he said to me that it was kind of a work of poetry of his, which I've begun reading it, and really, it's really quite lovely. So, the most important thing is which Avatar Emergency started with that film Avatar. And sort of emphasize the fact that we're always inside modes of thinking or systems of thinking, and so it's very hard to see things from the outside. And so one of the issues of what you're doing at university and what we're doing as leaving the university if they don't take us out is dealing with the issue of seeing systems that we function within from without. And I think in this sense, Professor Ulmer is one of the leading thinkers in the world. And he's gotten many tributes and guest reviews, but one of my favorites is from Jacques Derrida, who writes on applied grammatology, which was a number of years ago, wrote on applied grammatology, that offers a full, rigorous, and perceptive reading of my published work from the earliest to the most recent. Gregory Ulmer's interpretation is at once subtle, faithful, and educational, and would be of immense use for this alone. It is, moreover, an original and path-breaking book, whether discussing new art forms or the transformation of the pedagogical scene. I read this book with recognition and admiration as we look forward to hearing your words.
It is really a great honor and privilege to come and visit you today. I've known Los's work for a long time, and I hadn't ever had an opportunity to hang out with him for a while. And I tell you, it's quite an amazing experience, as you know. I really enjoyed it. And I suppose you mentioned Florida. I guess part of the reason I had some idea or other that this place was full of ice and snow, and I don't know, it's pretty nice last couple of days, but I did put off coming here a few times before. And I wish I hadn't. So.
It was fabulous. It was nice having you.
Cool. So I have a title which actually was wrenched out of me just quite recently, and so I decided to call it Apparatus Love, and hopefully that'll make sense eventually. But what I'm going to be doing is just describing a recent project in the context of some work that I've been doing, some larger questions of the digital apparatus, which has come to be known as electracy. And electracy is to digital technologies what literacy is to alphabetic technologies. So there's this project I've been working on with my colleagues in the Florida Research Ensemble called Murphy's Well-Being. And the Florida Research Ensemble is how I became electrate. I am not electrate myself, but the Florida Research Ensemble is because it has a number of colleagues that work, for example, Barbara Jo Ravel, I collaborated with in this Murphy's Well-Being, and also Jack Stenner, who is in visualization arts. So we have done this work together. And it has to do with this consultancy, as I'm saying. I'm going to be talking about this approach to thinking of consulting. And we're going to be looking at this work here in a minute. This word consult is something that I want to foreground. But the genre of the project, this Murphy's Well-Being, is a genre of situation that is known as disaster. Disaster is a certain kind of experience, particularly of a Superfund site. What this image that we're looking at here is simply a map of the United States marked with Superfund sites, 1,300 Superfund sites. And I thought that it's interesting because Murphy's Well-Being addresses a Superfund site that we have in Gainesville, Florida, and of course, the Superfund site originated in the Love Canal, which is in Niagara Falls City. I was talking to some people here at the hotel and so forth, and somebody lives there, and said, oh yeah, I live right down the street from Love Canal, and so on. So this love is part of the apparatus love. That love is kind of part of what I'm going to be talking about. The Superfund site in Gainesville is Cabot Copper Superfund site. It's related to a pine tar production, a wood preservation site owned by the Cabot Corporation. I love the Cabot logo. You can see the Cabot Corporation doesn't hide its business. Its C's there are in the shape of the biohazard warning sign. And I don't know if you remember Battlestar Galactica, but the Cylon Raider looks a lot like the Cabot logo. And the wood treatment plant there in Gainesville has been in operation for about 100 years. It got put on the Superfund site in the early 1980s, also shortly after it was founded from Love Canal. And it's a particular process of modifying, of treating wood. And you transform it by fire, and it makes three products. Makes pine tar, and that's great to preserve wood, and particularly they used it to preserve utility poles. I really like that term, utility poles, kind of like we think about the polarity of American culture, American economics, and we have the utility pole over here, and then over here is the futility pole maybe, or at least there's another pole, the useless or something. The utility poles are treated, railroad ties, building materials. And so you get three products, pine tar, you get charcoal, that's not so bad, but then you also get creosote. And we all know Mr. Creosote. Can you see him there? We should click on that. can't see him too well in this image. If you remember the Monty Python Meaning of Life movie, Mr. Creosote actually exploded after he had consumed, great quantities of food. But creosote, nobody expects, nobody wants creosote. So there's this 90-acre site. A couple acres of it are intensely polluted. And part of what I'm going to be talking about is the location of this production site is on a certain trajectory. So the pollution is soaking into the earth, into the aquifer. Of course, Florida, karst topography, limestone, very, very porous. And there's a trajectory going sort of northwest, goes right into this well field, and well field provides drinking water for the whole region. It's called Murphy's well field, or Murphy's, sort of got bowdlerized, shortened a little bit, providing the drinking water. And part of what's interesting too about the site is, and again, I don't know if this is a little bit dark here, but yeah, I guess you can see that. So the remediation process, I mean, they confronted the corporation. Actually, in the 80s, they figured out it was polluting the land, so they changed their production methods and they started polluting the air. They polluted the air around the neighborhood. Actually, a neighborhood that's called Stephen Foster, named after the great songwriter. And so when the corporation took responsibility, and actually Cabot has a holding corporation called Beazer, which its business is to go around and after the piece of the world has been polluted and so forth, then it buys it up and then it supposedly remediates it for a certain amount of money, and it'll negotiate how much that is. And they have this experimental process. So the challenge, I mean, one problem is the air and so forth in the Stephen Foster neighborhood, but more seriously is the problem of the pollution of the groundwater for the whole region, make the place pretty much uninhabitable, at least, or it would cost a fortune to bring in the water some way. So they have this thing called solidification, and it's experimental, but they're going to take all the polluted soils, kind of put it into a kind of a ziggurat, maybe in about an acre, and then they're going to inject it with chemicals. This is all our STEM discipline folks have figured out how to do this. Inject it with a chemical, and it freezes it. So it binds with the earth and with the pollutant, and fixes it and freezes it. And we're going to talk about themata, where you revisit, reoccupy, retrieve old methods. But that was the method that God used to keep Satan in hell. So like in the ninth circle of hell, Satan was kept in a frozen lake. I thought that was pretty ingenious that the STEM finally caught up with us on that solution. So Murphy's Wellbeing is this project that we did, which is in the let's get this. Thank you. Is the name of this digital installation that I made with the Florida Research Ensemble. I'm the theorist, and so the hard work of building this thing was done by my colleagues. But there was an exhibit. It was nice. The community is finally kind of waking up to the realities of this event, of this disaster, or this plague, if you like, that is engaging the polis. And they brought in the artists. We had this exhibit, and we made this exhibition for it. And it is a consult, we're saying. So we're addressing the community as a whole and attempting some kind of educational process. Now, this was the first version of this project, and it's still, we kind of disassembled it, and we're reassembling it in a second version, putting it online. But what I want to do is just show two short clips. One is just first one is a couple minutes. The second one is about 6 minutes. And the first one is just kind of a walkthrough of what the installation looked like when it was being used in the exhibit. So we'll start with that one. Are we getting? Oops. disappeared. Yeah. We're getting sound here. Oh, it's over there.
To respond to presses on the screen.
Okay, cool.
For example, homes in the adjacent
There we go.
Murphy's Well-Being is an installation composed of 2 synchronized video projections and an interactive multi-touch table.
Was that the wrong move?
The cabin copper Superfund site and adjacent surroundings. They
Oh. No. It's showing on the screen now.
Homes in the adjacent Stephen Foster neighborhood function as buttons. The viewer presses
So far.
a home, thus triggering playback of contextual related video projected on the nearby walls. The projection on the left will be an interview with an occupant from the home. And the projection on the right will be a video programmatically selected from one of the pop cycle categories previously enumerated.
Okay. Okay, now. Well, this is the trailer that was shown while if the installation was not being used, then we played this trailer, and this trailer kind of explains the project in more detail. It's really quite beautiful.
Murphy's Well-Being is a consult, a genre for community deliberation on a Superfund emergency. There is a disturbance in the wellness field of North Central Florida. There is an appeal, a call from our neighborhoods, and from one neighborhood in particular, named for the songwriter Stephen Foster. It is a test of response ability. What does that feel? Is it obligation? The stickiness of pine tar is an allegory of what bonds us with our neighbors. How can the Stephen Foster neighborhood serve as a fable about the wellness of America? First, because Stephen Foster is acclaimed as the father of American music. Composing Old Folks at Home for a blackface troupe in 1851, Foster needed a name for the river referred to in the lyrics. Foster never visited the South, but he found the name Swanee in a dictionary. A version of the song bowdlerized to remove reminders of the slavery institutionalized in the antebellum South is now the state song of Florida. Stephen Foster imagined our plantation as an image of happiness, if only it was as easy to purify our water as it is to clean up history. Who else imagined our happiness? Samuel Taylor Coleridge in Kubla Khan, one of the greatest poems of the Romantic imagination, invented a composite city called Xanadu. In Xanadu did Kubla Khan a stately pleasure dome decree. Coleridge based his description of the pleasure dome mostly on Bartram's Travels, published in the late 18th century, in which Bartram described the karst topography of north central Florida. 4 sites are composited in Xanadu: Chengdu, Kubla Khan's capital city, the mountains of Kashmir, the caves of Abyssinia, and the sinkholes and underground river of Alachua County. In other words, what happens to us is happening in Xanadu. Xanadu is polluted, and the old folks at home testify to the disaster. The Florida Research Ensemble produced Murphy's Well-Being to help us understand our fix. Other consultants informed the community about engineering options or corporate calculations of cost-benefit outcomes. The MER agency consultants add the insights of arts and others' expertise, concerned with a measure of well-being which, we know, is priceless. The testimony of our neighbors is a call not just to duty, but to Xanadu. The Well of Stories is a database Xanadu, a potential fable to remind us that the local is global. As Xanaduans, we live in 4 places simultaneously: Alachua County, India, Hollywood, and Utopia. 4 forces shape our destiny, recorded in 4 subplots, the first of which consists of the testimonies of neighbors reporting from the disaster zone. The second track is the history of pine tar. It is the story of corporations going back to the discovery of America by Europeans trying to get to India to trade in pepper and other spices. They treated the hulls of their ships with pine tar. The third subplot is our mythology, dramatized in Hollywood tales of superheroes that express our belief in the capacity of individuals to change the world. The fourth subplot is philosophy, the voice of wisdom, explaining our ideals about well-being, about how the world should be. If the story of Murphy's well-being is a fable of Xanadu, its moral remains to be constructed by interacting with the well. What is our answer to the ancient question, how should we live? The well is an archive of narrative tracks to be explored in basic montage units, a collective fable composed 1 ideogram at a time. The fable emerges by juxtaposing neighbors' testimonies with passages from the other Xanadu places. You consult with the well by selecting neighbors and relating them to one or more of the subplots shaping their world: history, mythology, philosophy. The inventors of cinema learned from ancient ideograms how to express thought by means of images. An ideogram combines 2 sensory properties to evoke an immaterial thought. The Chinese character for happiness combines the figure of music, a hand striking a drum, with singing, an open mouth. Happiness is a feeling like that expressed in a song such as Old Folks at Home, Way Down Upon the Murphy Wellings Field. How do these ideograms make you feel? A clue to the moral of the fable is in the very name of Murphy's Well Field, since the Murphy game is a classic confidence trick, a bait and switch scam native to American folk culture. We wanted pepper and got poison. If you used pepper today, you helped pollute Xanadu. The pine tar commodity produced at the Cabot Copper's site is a kind of tar baby, like the one created by Briar Fox and Briar Bear to catch Briar Rabbit, and the fables adapted to cinema in Walt Disney's Song of the South. But is that really our song, our South? There's a note of optimism in these stories, since the trickster rabbit always extricated himself from the fix. Let us hope that is also our story.
I don't want to tell you how much pepper Lois used in his meal today. It's like a lot. So so that's we get an idea of the project from that, and partly, what I want to talk about a little bit in this genre of disaster is, how is it that we keep making these kinds of mistakes? Go around asking the question, well, who polluted? Who made the decision to pollute the well field of north central Florida? And the wondering about causality. And some of the activists there in Gainesville, wonderful, more power to them, but they act as if this was some sort of an exception, that the Cabot Coppers, things went wrong there, but every place else it works fine, and so why can't you just, totally bias, totally new homes and do everything? And they don't get is like there are 1,300 of these places, and this is business as usual. So part of it is just this kind of puzzlement, and what I want to share with you and really ask you about is so what about the kind of thinking that electricity might provide? Does it give us some better purchase upon these kinds of situations? So it has to do too with the kind of mood, I think, maybe that I'm in or that the FRE's in. I was in Boston recently and I hadn't been in the museum for a while, and went by and saw that I'd forgotten that Gauguin's masterpiece is there. It has been owned by the Boston Museum of Art since the 1920s. And this work reminded me of some things that we're trying to get at in Murphy's Well-Being, and maybe there's this genre of the Vita roof you might know about, where like a poet, a later poet, will get into an argument with an earlier poet and really try to refute or change whatever the earlier poem. We might say philosophically that Murphy's Well-Being is in a Vita roof with Gauguin's painting. And the title of this painting, on the upper left-hand corner, written in French, he had written this catechism: where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Sort of, we can shorten it: whence, what, whither. And what I think comes out in that title, and if you think about the circumstances, remember the circumstances of this painting was done in 1898. It was Gauguin's second trip to Tahiti, and been quite disappointed after all, sort of primitivism and things with the experience there, as you know, from Noah. And he had tried to commit suicide. And we said, well, the Vita roof is, maybe that's not the best solution, but he survived that anyway, painted this painting. It is a kind of an account of the sort of the whole of life, from birth to death, moving across the iconography of the painting. But particularly I want to pick up on this idea of this movement. And there is significance. The French have this word sens, which it can mean sense in the way of meaning, but can also mean direction. And what's, I think, the kind of meaning, the kind of sens, the kind of sense that is specific to electricity, the electricity picks up on, is vectoral sense. It's a kind of the sense of movement, of direction, of flow. So like the flow from the polluted site to the well field, there's a direction there. You can map it, GPS, the geographical positioning system. And again, as I say, the STEM disciplines are very good with that, getting very precise with that. But there's what we're concerned about in Murphy's well-being is existential positioning system. That there's this vectoral movement, which is, if you like, a metaphysical movement, a kind of teleology. There's a kind of directionality in the world. And we want to see if we can understand how that vectoral flow of energy works. So we might say the challenge of electricity is to add we might say existential positioning system to the geographical positioning system. And some of you are probably familiar with Paul Klee's pedagogical sketchbooks, but Klee famously, he's no longer interested in just imitating the visible or, putting into a picture what's already visible, but to render visible, to make visible, bring into visibility certain energy, certain life energy. And this is his famous black arrow. Every line for Klee is a line of force, a line of energy, and his art is an examination of this vectoral sense that there is, this directional sense that's in the world. So we're getting at that in Murphy's well-being, and we're saying that it's this four-part system. So an existential positioning system, how does it work? In pre-modern times, there was an existential positioning system, which was perfected. You've all probably studied it in Dante, and he wrote sort of the most concise, or certainly the most anthologized account of that four-level typological system that the pre-modern, that the Christian theological metaphysics used to account for the world. And the nice thing about that, if you want to call it a cognitive map, was that citizens in that world knew where they were in the cosmos. So, it is that typological system. So it's a basic tiered, nested set of stories. The basic story is that of the Old Testament, Israel coming out of Egypt. The allegory proper is the story of the life of Christ, which is the story of resurrection. The third level, the moral level, as it's called, is the life of the believer. And the believer in the individual position can typologically figure the progress of their own salvation in relationship to the Old and New Testament typologies. And then the ultimate level, highest level, the anagogical level, is a cosmological story about the progress of the world moving through history to the end of the world, to the end of time, to the redemption of the world through Christianity. That's a particular story. Everybody could find their position in that story. Now, as we know, in modernity, that story collapses. That we have the so-called impoverishment of experience. You move into a one-dimensional world, a world of utility poles, basically, and a kind of an alienated existence. So the challenge of the consult then is to say, well, we need a new kind of allegory. And what you saw, which can position people into the world. This allegorical structure, this typological structure is still useful. We don't still hold to the old theological metaphysics, but there's a new metaphysics, there's a new set of relationships, and we want to identify these and help citizens find their position in this world. And so that's what we were in this new order. So that's what we were doing there, wanting people to experience that as they encountered and interacted with the well. And there's several maps here, so you can take this four-part structure, and obviously this four-part structure, we're going to be talking a lot about it, has to do with these four causes that we mentioned there. And we have this map going through, and I'm going to be talking more about these four parts to see what we can do with them. So the apparatus, I've been talking about this, and it's important to clarify something in relationship to the consult. So specifically, the consult is to electracy what the dialogue is to literacy. I mean, this is our ambition, and we know that the dialogue was invented in the context of Plato's academy, the school for school. So an apparatus consists of three parts. There's a matrix of interdependent interacting dimensions. One of those dimensions is a technology. So alphabetic writing is a technology, digital computing is a technology, natural language for that matter in the human body is a technology and equipment. That's one dimension. Then the second dimension is the institution formation. So you need an institution, you institutionalize the technology, and within that institution you begin to invent the operating practices. So Plato founds the academy. It's a new institution. A school is as much an invention of literacy as is alphabetic writing, and therein is invented the practices of logic and so forth. And then a third dimension, which is identity experience. So people in this new institution, using the new technologies, begin to experience themselves differently, and both individually and collectively. And it's important too to keep in mind that each apparatus does not replace the previous one, but it supplements it. It opens a new dimension. So orality, which we're saying these is simplified, but this is the basic structure, is organized in its institution formation as religion, and as tribe and spirit in the identity dimension. That continues, as we know, it continues today. It still competes actually with literacy, school as the institution formation, inventing method, ultimately makes science possible, selfhood for the individual person, the nation state, ultimately, the city-state first as the collective form of identity. So having that in mind as a kind of an analogy and forming a template, we can talk about electracy, what's happening today, what are the equivalents today? And just, to make this assertion, obviously digital technologies, and what the theory suggests is that the institution formation is entertainment, or the entertainment corporation I'm going to be talking about, and that there's a new identity experience coming as well. So we're going to be talking more about that institution formation, but the thing to have in mind is specifically consult as a means, as a genre for getting us to become native to this new electorate environment, to be able to learn within it and have some power and capacity within it. So we're saying that the consult is to electracy what the dialogue is to the academy. So we have in mind what exactly that was. So first of all, we think about the dialogue as an interface metaphor. It's certainly written in the new medium, so it's written down. It dramatizes a scene with Socrates, who is an exemplar of the new practice of the new apparatus, and it shows him performing, but it shows that it's dramatizing a conversation. So people are familiar with the conversational form, but within the context of the conversation, the student, the learner, is introduced to dialectic, which is the new capacity of reasoning that alphabetic writing made possible. So a consult is going to have to do those same sorts of things. We'll get to some suggestions about how that works. But just to remind you of an example, the dialogue of Euthyphro. This is very typical. Socrates is out in the street doing his gadfly thing. Euthyphro is hurrying towards the courts. He's going to, he has a purpose in mind. He's going to accuse his father of impiety. And of course, in this dialogue, that's somewhat ironic because we all know that Socrates eventually was himself accused of impiety and, in fact, tried and executed by a democratic city at that time for crime of impiety. So Socrates encounters Euthyphro, and he asks him, and this, that's a very familiar situation for an oral person, but then he asks a literate question. He asks Euthyphro to define impiety. Or you're going to act, you're going to take this action in the name of impiety. And of course, Euthyphro is not literate, and in fact, he begins to explain to Socrates what he intends, and he begins to contradict himself. And as you know, in the principles of literacy, principles of dialectic, that that there's a rule of non-contradiction. So if you make two claims and they contradict one another, the claims are false. So meanwhile, Euthyphro doesn't realize this. So, and here, this is the issue we want to get at. So Euthyphro is going to take an action. What Socrates is trying to show him is that he doesn't know what he's doing. He doesn't understand his purposes, and it's going to be a bad mistake to take this action. The context for this is the previous transitional genre from literacy, from morality to literacy, is tragedy. And we know the tragic situation. You've got a tragic hero, person of action, Oedipus, Antigone, Agamemnon, someone like that. And they have already taken an action, or they are in the process of taking an action. And this action goes by the name of ate. For the individual, this is an act of blindness, which they do something out of passion or in the heat of the moment, so to speak, and it's an action that's a mistake. And for the collectivity, this is a disaster. So Oedipus's personal ate, his personal blindness, is a disaster for the community. And the idea is, within the Greek, this history we're talking about, is that the dialogue is an alternative, shows us there's an alternative to the tragedies, an alternative to ate, and that is reason. So if you bring to bear reason on ate, you have a new hero, Socrates, and you have a new possibility for not making mistakes. Now this, how well did that go? I mean, this is the issue of that the apparatus wants to address. And part of the thing we're going to be talking about is the cause. So like we say, well, what is the cause? Why are these things happening? Why are these disasters seemingly, even still after 2,500 years of literacy and science and so forth, why are they still happening? And here's a little diagram, basically diagramming from Kant's three critiques, but it helps us understand that electracy doesn't replace orality or literacy. So basically, we say the vertical axis is the axis from religion, and its whole metaphysics is concerned about the actions of right and wrong. So we say that's its axis of address. The horizontal axis is the axis of literacy, and it is concerned with using science to determine the difference between what is true and what is false. And that's its focus, that's what it's concerned about. And that is not instead of right and wrong, but it's in addition to right and wrong, what is true and false. And then the third axis, and here's where electracy comes in. The third axis is, meaning the new apparatus, is its metaphysics is addressing neither right and wrong nor true and false. Those persist, those continue in their already existing institutional forms, but is concerned with pleasure and pain, concerned with attraction and repulsion. That is the specific concern, joy and sadness. That is the specific concern of electracy. And we're saying that it is in that dimension that causality exists. That's a new dimension of cause that we think we can get at now. So we're going to look at this figure of a neighbor, Roy Giersbach. That's not Socrates. This is one of the neighbors, and he is, juxtaposed there with our man, Mr. Rogers. So this is one of the things that came up in the video, or in the well. So a person might hear some of Roy's story, and then they would get the mythology, and it would be Mr. Rogers. As you're sort of comparing our two kinds of worldviews there. So the way literacy, specifically from Aristotle and the metaphysics of substance, the way literacy explained cause, at least up until modern science, was there were four causes. So I like the idea of four causes, four forces. And if we think about the pine tar, we say, well, pine tar, looking at that invention, what are the four causes? So there's material cause, which is the wood, so that's the material. There's the formal cause, which is the the sort of techniques of chemistry and so forth that transform the wood into pine tar. There's the efficient cause, which is the agent. In this case, let's say Cabot Coppers Corporation, which wants to make pine tar. And then there's the final cause, which is the sake of, for what? Why are we making this? And that is to preserve wood. So that got us a certain ways. And what I'm interested in terms of the vectoral sense is to say, what can we do with those four causes? What becomes of those four causes, or what replaces them? You know, in electricity, what is the power at work there? Can we take it into the new apparatus and transform it? And part of the way to think about this, what our philosophers tell us is that when you get the new apparatus, even though there's a mutation in the apparatus and transformation across the levels that we're talking about, nonetheless, there's also kind of a reoccupation. So Hans Blumenberg has used that word. So he says, you know, when modernity secularized, it's true that it threw out all the answers of the previous theological or metaphysical system, but it kept all the questions. And each way going back, so it's like the secular civilization reoccupied the metaphysical questions of the religious worldview, or you know, the religious worldview reoccupied the metaphysical questions of the magical world that had preceded it. So in looking at those four causes, if we look at them as a vectoral force or as a force of movement, we say, well, what is the minimum system that we learn from these four causes that could be the existential positioning system of a worldview that we could help citizens learn to position themselves, to see how what their place is in this universe of cause. What is this dimension of force? And what the argument says is that if we look at the reoccupation of the contemporary world going on back, regardless of the technology, there seems to be a fundamental, necessary and sufficient condition of energy or force that each moment of the apparatus or each historical epoch has noticed and has codified and has performed in its sense of understanding its own place in the world. And that force or form is a game. And what I want to go through here is just some of these parts of this structure, so that we can just see it in many, many different versions. But Michel Serres, this is another one of these philosophers, that picked up on Georges Bataille's idea that we need to think about our economic world not just in terms of the restricted economy, which is the economy of capitalism making a profit and so forth, and making products, but also the general economy, which is the economy that includes waste and expenditure. So we say include the whole circulation process from life to death, sort of what Gauguin was trying to get at in his Catechism of Painting. And one of the figures that's really clarified this, what Serres was interested in, was saying, well, where the Greeks were wrong was they thought that, or let's say they were working in what's sometimes called an old war machine, kind of a mechanical model, maybe even a clock-like model where you had balance, the golden mean. Said, no, it's not like that. It's a motor that the organization, this minimum necessary conditions of a full system is like a thermodynamic process. And that this thermodynamic process is that of extremes, the extremes of heat and cold, extreme differential. This is the structure that makes the system go. And we could say, well, from love and death as being these extremes. But Gregory Bateson gave us a very convenient image. He said this is the universal motor. And we might say if we're there to be a motor, or for there to be a functioning network or system, you need these four parts, which is a governor, a fuel reservoir, a cylinder, and a flywheel. And part of apparatus theory is to say, well, that the fact that a motor embodies those four powers, and for it to be a motor, it has to have at least these parts, that this is an abstract machine, that it's been thought about and noticed that this pattern functioning in the world, and this, you can't see this too well, but this is an old image of a game of polo, that in the ancient world, this game structure was noticed and made a sacrament within the game. So the game of polo was a game of polo, but it was also a ritual in which you were noticing and working through the ritual repetitions of these four powers. So the four powers in terms of a game like polo or golf or other games is a ball, a goal or a hole, a stroke, and a stick. That this is sort of the essential parts of the game. The Chinese, in Chinese writing, it had a system like this where they also made a ritual of it. They're saying that the ink, the paper, the gesture, and the brush together in the act of calligraphy is, again, celebrating or noticing or testifying to, really as a kind of an existential positioning system, that these are the basic parts of the universe or of the cosmos. This is how they work. And so when we're thinking about these different systems that are around us, we want to notice these structures. So I made a kind of a chart that is worth whether you can look at it at your leisure another time. But so I went just through a number of systems to notice that those four parts indeed are at work. Of course, on the left side we have Aristotle's four causes. You've got the polo game. These line up, and part of this is interesting. The calligraphy, but even in the transistor with its charge, source, gate, and drain has these four parts of the universal motor. And we could say that there's this vectorial sense. Even Lacan's drive, this is a diagram of the drive, but when you look at the terms that he uses for the drive, which is the body, libidinal drive of the human body, you get this thrust, source, object, and aim. It's again the same structure that it seems to repeat through every level and every dimension has this four-part system. So the question we were looking at in Murphy's well-being and in the consult in general is to say, well, what is this? What is this? The name of this force? How do we understand this motor, this thermodynamic drive working through these four positions in this abstract machine? How do we understand them in electricity? Is this force? Is this vector? The power of the universe that we haven't been able to access, not through religion, where the causality of the world is understood theologically in terms of God as being the cause, not through literacy, where science is the new metaphysics, where material explanations are attended to in terms of true and false, that neither one of those has been adequate. And we're saying there is this new dimension of causality that's now accessible within electricity. We want to address that. And the name of that cause, we're saying, is jouissance. We just call it that. The French use that word, but kind of bliss sense. It has to do with pleasure, pain. We're saying attraction, repulsion. This is the dimension of causality that we want to get at. So the idea is that we need a fifth cause. So we say, okay, let's accept the four causes. Let's accept this four-part vectorial drive. But we say it's inadequate. It left out something. Electricity makes it possible to notice what that is and to perhaps address it. I mean, this would be the optimistic view. So we say there's a fifth cause, a gift cause, and it has to do in that larger sense. Paul Virilio, I've used him a lot, but he's written about this where he says, well, there's such a thing as a general accident. Remember that disaster is the genre that we're working in. And if we follow the inventions, we say follow the inventions, this is the kind of the mantra or the operating word here, is that when you invent, Virilio says, when you invent the car, you invent the car wreck. I mean, any invention, there's an accident that goes with it. He's very worried about the internet. He says such a thing as an internet accident which, because of the light speed of our communication systems and of our electronic grid, can happen everywhere simultaneously. Are we really prepared? Do we have the kind of thinking, do we have the kind of institutional resources available and so forth to address policy that would be adequate to that kind of a disaster? And it is kind of funny, if you read the story, you know, that at the very beginning of the automobile, when you think about that example from Virilio, that in the state of New Jersey, there were only 2 cars at the very beginning, and they had a head-on collision. Of course, I mean, it's because there's only one road, I suppose. But it makes the point, though, that there is this accident. And we're going to call that, we're going to say, the gift cause, or the fifth cause. Gift, you know, the philosophers point out gift in German. Yes, it can mean present in that sense of a Christmas gift. It can also mean poison, that there is this doubleness that we need to be attuned to. And so this is what we were kind of exploring in Murphy's well-being, and particularly as you saw in the video there. So we're saying, okay, so what is the gift cause? And actually something, I think part of what if there was any contribution that our project made to the conversation in Gainesville, Florida, it was that actually nobody involved in any dimension, from the corporation through the policymakers to the activists and so on, nobody knew actually why pine tar was created. And so part of what we did was explain to them why it was created. So we say, okay, the reason why you needed pine tar, yeah, it had nothing to do with railroad ties, because pine tar was invented back in the day when the most expensive equipment in the world was trading ships. And these European trading ships were going into the warmer waters. We just go through this gift cause. Why were they going into the warmer waters? They were going into the warmer waters to get to India, to get the spice, and particularly to get pepper, being, you know, the foundational spice. And, you know, pepper was cultivated in India in ancient times. It was a weed. Somebody brought it into cultivation. It was the first commodity, really. I mean, it was used in that modern sense of commodity. It was actually used as money for a long time. The Romans controlled the trade in pepper. And in fact, they were able, through taking caravans of pepper to the borders with the Visigoths, so they held off the Visigoth invasion of Rome by at least about 100 years, supposedly. So it's tremendously valuable. And there was this enormous desire for it. So as you know, the Portuguese controlled the trade routes around Africa to get to India for the pepper. So Columbus, greatest map maker of his day, persuades the Spanish that he'll go west, and he goes west and he runs into America. Oops, America. I was sort of in the way, where am I? And I want to make this point just because these are shipworms that we're eating through the hulls, that when you go by the spice rack in your grocery store, that's a miracle. That's a miracle. That's worth $1 billion back in the day, right? Or it's a dream of some kind that has now become reality. And the thing is that what was this desire? This is what electricity gets at. That is to say, we as a nation were willing to commit genocide. We didn't intend to. Oh, the indigenous people seem to all die, but in order to get spice, in order to get pepper. Why are the Native Americans called Indians? Oh, we thought we were in India. Oh, excuse me. You know, what else you got? So it's this taste. Now, the taste of pepper is, we'll just take that as exemplar of the gift cause, of the cause of events that now we're addressing in electricity, and that is the human beings in our bodies have taste. Immanuel Kant, the reason why Immanuel Kant in his 3 critiques, specifically the 3rd critique on the judgment of taste, is the beginnings of electricity philosophically or in the metaphysical system, is because he is arguing about and showing us that the judgment of taste and the experience of beauty, which is non-conceptual and even non-cognitive, he thought, is a capacity of human intelligence, one of the 3 intellectual virtues, of the same level and power as pure and practical reason. So, which is to say of science and religion, of understanding and reason. So taste is a metaphysical, it's a power, it's a capacity, and electricity supports taste. Now remember, the definition of the sublime is attraction and repulsion at the same time, the experience of attraction and repulsion. And the reason we want to talk about vectoral sense is because attraction and repulsion is a vector, not an idea. I mean, you can talk about it as an idea, you can define it. It's not conceptual, it's not a mode of reason. You don't reason it through in true false, and so forth. It is a power, it is a force. You feel it, attraction and repulsion. And electricity has to address that dimension. This is a challenge of the invention, has to address that dimension. Now, what else is involved here? I have a couple of images that's a Venus from the Lascaux caves. And this is, even Plato recognized, this is a Neoplatonic, from the Neoplatonic Academy, this is the Florentine Academy. This is a pedagogical device, a didactic painting, Venus, in the Neoplatonic Academy for the Medici students. Plato recognized that, yes, okay, the ascent, we're going to truth, to the forms, which is in thought only, but you have to start. Where does it start? The ascension starts in the sexual body, in the human desire and attraction. Then you move up through the levels of understanding beauty itself, the pure forms, so on. But here's the other thing. I've got this old image of Leviathan. So consult is addressing this power, this vector, this force of taste in the human body, but specifically not the individual human body. You all know that. But it's a new pedagogy, consultancy addressing the collective dimension of identity, which is that of the corporation. We're saying a new kind of subject has emerged within electricity. It's always been there potentially in one form or another, but it's kind of like this. So in literacy, one of the marks of the invention of the individual as a new category of identity and experience of self was in the classic, in the tragedy, in the celebrating the rituals. They started scripting them. Then you have the chorus, and Thespis, the actor, steps out from the chorus, speaks a scripted part in the persona of an individual. That was the invention of self. We say, well, if you wanted to mark a moment in the invention of literacy, their selfhood is emerging, manifest in front of the people, in front of the public. Similarly, and this is how we have to understand what's happening to us now, the Citizens United case, the United States Supreme Court, which declared corporations to be persons, that was a long time in coming. Finally now, corporations are persons. Here's the key thing. They're not persons like Thespis. It's a new kind of personhood. It's a collective personhood in which you and I participate in some way. And the challenge is, how can we as individuals experience and think through this collective being that has formed and is a person? And specifically, how does this collective being speaks? This collective being speaks with money. Money is a pure commodity. Pepper was a commodity. A lot of things have been used as money. Pepper was used as money. Gold used as money. But now money is money. It's a pure force circulating at light speed globally. And speaking the discourse of the corporation, that's not something to fix. That's not something that can be changed. That is the site of electricity. That is the site of the emerging civilization. This is a new kind of person, a new kind of Leviathan that we need to address. And the consult is that. That is, it is a dialogue taken up at this level of pedagogy, educating corporations, educating collective beings. It remains to be figured out exactly how to do that. We're working on it. Murphy's Well-Being 2 will continue it. I'm hoping that some of you folks here will take it up as well. So let me stop at that point and see if we have time for questions. Thank you. So I don't know how Los want to Yes.
In the chart where you have at the bottom that it's entertainment.
Right.
It becomes a goal. Can you scroll to that? That it's a grid and then you.
Right. Right.
You have,
yeah.
efficacy, and then towards the, there, no.
Yeah, it's the apparatus here.
Here it is.
Yeah. Electricity, right.
So I don't know if I missed it thinking of some, as you were speaking about the fifth estate, but also, so if you might recapitulate what that fifth estate is, and secondly, how, doesn't entertainment seem like very shallow and insubstantial sort of goal or means of embodying your worldview?
Not at all. But, you know, it might seem so. I mean, this is the problem, right? Like we've talked about before. So Galileo has a toy telescope, remember? And he's using his toy telescope, originally developed as a toy, to look at the heavens and he's thinking in this scientific worldview. And, you know, he invites the brightest, smartest people he knows, and they're the church fathers, and invites them over. Look, if you look through the telescope, you'll see that this thing that you think is absurd is true, and that is that the earth moves. You know, because remember when Galileo said the earth moves, everybody laughed. You know, it was really funny and really stupid. And they refused to look through the telescope. Or
I
through,
really need you to tie this to like those video games where
so specifically entertainment.
people
Yeah,
blow up and pieces of people fly here and there.
right.
And
Well,
in a particularly Sandra Bullock.
yes. Well, okay. No. That's a good question. So for example, remember that the Hadron Collider comes after 2,500 years, right, of the maturing of science and so forth. So but it comes out of conceptual thinking. Conceptual thinking, the invention of method, defining of terms, focusing on what can be determined true and false, then based on evidence, I mean, as you know. But where did it begin? So, you know, the famous story of, probably was actually in Aristotle's Lyceum. So Aristotle and his pupils, the Peripatetics, and their project is to define man. Remember? And they define man as a featherless biped. And Diogenes was sunning himself, you know, outside of his barrel, probably naked, whatever, there in the plaza. And he gets himself a plucked chicken and he runs into the group and he says, "Behold your man," with a plucked chicken. And the Peripatetics took him seriously and examined the plucked chicken to determine the difference between a plucked chicken and a human being. And they said a featherless biped with flat nails. Now that's where it started. Pretty stupid, right? It doesn't start with, you know, Leibniz inventing calculus or something. I mean, it starts in this really, you know, simple way, or Socrates, you know, who's trying to work it out in his head because he supposedly famously didn't write, and he would stand for 24 hours and think because he's thinking through, you know, dialectic or something. So it begins in that way. But the other thing to keep in mind too, I mean, what are some other examples? So, and I invite you to all participate in these sort of chart building, but so the analogy is we'll always say Socrates is our exemplary figure of literacy. And he is taken as a conceptual persona by all the philosophers, everybody since, to say this is critical thinking and so forth. And he models that. So we say, who is our Socrates today? Our Socrates today, so there's the blank spot in the template, but you don't repeat literacy. The challenge of invention say, we already have literacy. Electricity won't be literacy. What will it be? Who, you know, what sort of person fits in that slot? And it won't be a really smart person. Won't be Richard Feynman or, I don't know, whoever, Einstein or somebody like that. It's not going to be a smart person because electricity doesn't concern smart. It's not about smart in that way. It's not about reason, logic, true and false. It's another kind of force. And so I always suggest someone like, you know, I mean, you can pick your celebrity here, but it's going to be a celebrity, somebody like Britney Spears is going to be our Socrates. Because this person... Because what does this person know? Something, I think my mouse died or something. So what is the challenge of electricity that where is that side of intelligence? It's how to be an image. What electricity is about is how to be an image. And who knows better than how to be an image than celebrities, right? Because their image is out circulating in the world. I mean, Elizabeth Taylor was asked about why she was so popular, and I mean, she said, I don't know, it has something to do with my image, and she says, all I know is it makes a lot of money. Can't remember which, it's probably something like Clark Gable or was asked something about, wow, I'd love to be, you have so much fun, I would certainly love to be Clark Gable, and Clark Gable says, so would I. Clark Gable is an image, it's out there circulating in the world. So this dimension we're talking about is not about being smart. And one of the ways I like to put it is like Miley Cyrus. So Miley Cyrus was twerking on, there was a big scandal. She was twerking on some award show or something like that. And what we have to understand is the corporations are twerking. And we like it. We want to learn how to do it. And I Googled twerking, and I got tons of YouTube videos of people showing me how to twerk. I said, you can learn how to do it. I can show you, but I can do it now, sort of. We love pepper, and we're willing to commit Holocaust to get it. This is cause. See, this is what I'm saying. This is cause. If you look away from that cause, you're not going to get it. Disaster will continue. So we talk about, the war machine. We talk about, these transformations. So remember, the nation state eventually broke away from the church. The modern nation state, no longer part of the whole Roman Empire, breaks away from the church. What's happening today is the corporation continuing that pattern is breaking away from the nation state and becoming its own power. And a symptom of this new war machine, where things are going is Sony versus North Korea. That's the next war. It's Sony. Now that could be preempted by some other A-bomb going off somewhere, but it's the corporation and information cyberspace network systems. That's the current war machine. Not even the motor, even.
Although I did hear that from some interview of some hacker that there are at least 4,000 hackers that could have done the same penetration into the system. So it's even
Right.
it's not even exceptional.
No, and that brings up another issue. So one of the things I had in that other chart was I'm saying that the institution formation is the fifth estate. What do we mean by the fifth estate? So the fourth estate is, the three estates of power originally in the French Revolution. That was the aristocracy, the clergy, and the people. That kind of got translated in 19th century modern democracies into the three houses, the tricameral, executive, judicial, and congressional, legislative. And then the fourth estate is journalism. And journalism is an attempt to take true false out into the world. It takes Aristotle's categories out into the world, where, what, why, when, how, and so forth, and tries to find out what's going on and report that so that the polis, so the people can make a decision. The fifth estate takes another step. Now you can do fifth estate work, you can do fourth estate work in the fifth estate. So, Tiananmen Square or, the Arab Spring, people can get their cell phones out, or you can videotape a cop shooting somebody or whatever. That's sort of fourth estate work by fifth estate means. But fifth estate is where citizens take up this new dimension of identity that we're talking about, where they begin to keep track of the issues we're saying of well-being, of their own well-being, whatever, and they have to have a power that is equal to the new Leviathan, right? How do you talk back to the power? How do you talk back to the corporation, for example? And this is where I'm picking up on your point about the hackers. So the analogy is, this is from John Cage, you probably heard before, what's the difference between a dialect and a language? A language is a dialect with an army. So the fifth estate, that is, the fifth estate needs, that is representing people not of any one particular nation, any one particular region, but globally, on behalf of well-being, meaning thriving, surviving of everybody, not just those that have the money or not just those that have the Air Force or whatever, you need a power. So dialect of an army, the fifth estate needs anonymous. Occupy, anonymous, these are entities of fifth estate. Snowden, for that matter, is part of the fifth estate, meaning that that the corporation has to believe that that this fifth estate political entity can bring down their system and make them stop making money. And so they'll cooperate with the polis, with the people. This is the sort of idea about how the fifth estate will work politically. It'll be at this dimension. I mentioned Sony and North Korea because North Korea actually has real weapons, but but they're saying that they have weapons, but if they can't fire them electronically, well, they're going to go out and light a match under their nuclear missile and something. I mean, if your electrical system's down, you can't shoot it. So we're all dependent on that grid, and so the hackers are the new ninja or something.
To follow up on that, could you also unpack the notion of the avatar?
Yeah, the avatar.
In opposition to
Yes.
security?
I had that in there too, sort of as a placeholder, but and Lois mentioned avatar emergency, so I was trying to get at there, but the idea, part of this idea of themata or reoccupation or like retrieval is, so we look back and we say, we want the functionality of avatar. That is, part of the reason why we're making so many mistakes, we might say, is we don't know what we're doing collectively. So individuals, you and I know there's all kind of things like climate change, where of course we're educated people. We know these things are happening, but collectively we're not able to act on this. When the state of North Carolina did a survey and they said, well, let's see what the effect of climate change is going to be on the Outer Banks. They said, well, in about 50 years there won't be any Outer Banks. And then what did the state of North Carolina do? It passed a law that you can't use climate science to make policy decisions because all of the stakeholders came and said, my property's not worthless. It used to be worth $4 billion, now it's worth nothing because in 50 years it's going to be underwater, according to your stupid, policy people. So you can't say that. Well, that's stupid. So the idea of avatar is the collectivity has to know what it's doing. And so we say, well, we need the functionality of avatar. And when I just went back, an avatar is a convenient word because it's out there now in the discourse. We've used it incorrectly. The way avatar is actually used in popular culture is much more like the way we should use brand. So we imagine we're in Second Life, and we imagine that we are the center of the universe, and we send our avatar out, and it's like a purple fire-breathing dragon with super magical powers. That's really our brand, because the way avatar works, the Bhagavad Gita, we say, okay, but let's really look at that term. What does it mean? In the Bhagavad Gita, here we have in the middle of this big, epic battle or this epic story of India, you have this moment where there's going to be a civil war between the two sides, and Arjuna, is going to be the one that gives the command on one side, the good guys, I guess, and he rides up with his charioteer, his best friend is Krishna. At this point, and then Arjuna starts having some mixed feelings. He says, I don't know, a lot of my family over there, there's my friend, there's my cousin, and so forth. I don't think I want to fight. I don't want to do this. And at that point, Krishna reveals himself to Arjuna as avatar, meaning representing God. And Krishna then, through the books of the Bhagavad Gita, explains to Arjuna how the world works. Of course, it only takes an instant in real time. It takes a long time to read it, but in historical time. And what Krishna explains to Arjuna is how the world works. He explains the cosmos, he explains ethos, he explains to him the mysteries of attraction and repulsion, he explains to him life and death. And he says, you don't kill as people, God does. Death is an illusion, and so forth, Hindu, if you like, metaphysics. And Arjuna learns his position in the world. He gets his existential positioning right. Okay, I'm a warrior. Warriors have duties. I know what to do. That's the ethos. Well, what we're saying is we don't want Hinduism, Christianity, or any other particular theology, but we want the function of avatar. That is, we as individuals want to know existential positioning. Where am I? Why does the world work? Why are these things happening? Why are my family killing each other? What can I do about it? That's the avatar function that we want. So individual people, through the powers of the apparatus and design of the technology, design of the rhetoric, need to be able to understand what is happening collectively before we make mistakes. This is the same problem that Socrates ran into with Euthyphro, right? Euthyphro is going to take an action he's going to regret. You're going to make a bad mistake because you're in contradiction with yourself. You haven't reasoned it through. And now we're saying collectively, we need to know collectively and not know. This is the thing. It's not a matter of information about climate change. We have to experience. And the way Descartes put this was, what if God, Descartes, inventor of scientific method, what if God were an evil deceiver? You know, if God were an evil deceiver and, you know, made us for a sport, then if we fell asleep in front of the fire, our left foot would be in the fire, but we wouldn't know it for a very long time. And by the time we figured it out, our foot would be burned off. It'll be a little matchstick of a snub down there. You know, and I think Samuel Beckett sort of decided, well, that's actually the way the world works. But it's kind of like they say with artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is kind of stupid because the computer has got to know that when George Washington is in Washington, D.C., so is its left foot. But the computer doesn't know that. Or if you've got to tell it, you've got to tell it everything. It's so stupid. So we, as people, we got to know that our left foot is in the fire. And we have to experience it. It's attraction, repulsion. You have to actually feel, you got to feel the pain. And so if your actions, you know, collectively are destroying the planet, you can't be allowed to do that. Or, that is, but it's not going to be somebody come in with a bayonet and make you stop watering your lawn. You know, we have to get it somehow. This is a challenge, collectively. You know, maybe, or, you know, what the motor shows us is you just sort of point this thing somehow. Or like, you know, Lois took me out to Niagara Falls the other day and it's like, you don't want to know what it feels like to be a human being? You're like being in a barrel going over the falls. Because you know what we're talking about, sex and death, you all feel that. You feel it. You know it. You know, you see movies about it, read books and understand it and so forth. But you are in that power. You are in that force. So to me, that's avatar, is that functionality. Can we take our apparatus of total knowledge and somehow design it so that individuals can understand in that way?
Any other questions?
Go and do likewise then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Don't believe that's an angry. He's still